Well, I've talked about the King of the Monsters on this channel and my old channel more times than I can count, so why not start to talk about the eighth wonder of the world? We got Kong Skull Island coming out next month, so I figured why not dedicate the month of February to King Kong? So let's start off with the one that started it all, King Kong, released in 1933, directed by both Merian C. and Ernest B. Schoedsack, and stars Fay Wray, Robert Armstrong, and Bruce Cabot. The movie is so iconic. It's over 80 years old that there really is not much to say that everyone has said besides my own personal opinion. So first of all, if you're one of the few people out there who's never seen or even heard of the King Kong story, whether it's through this movie or the remakes, here's the plot. Robert Armstrong plays Carl Denham, adventurous film director who's going to an uncharted island to shoot his next movie. He brings along an actress, Ann Darrow, played by Fay Wray, and aboard the ship that he's hired, the SS Venture, he heads to this mysterious Skull Island. Unfortunately, once they reach the island, the natives kidnap Ann Darrow and sacrifice her to their god, King Kong. This giant gorilla who eventually steals Anne into the jungle, so it's up to Carl Denham and the ship's first mate, Jack Driscoll, to go out, save her, and this eventually leads into bringing Kong to New York City. So yes, the plot is very much a monster movie plot, but it's so well done that it transcends into not just a great monster movie, but one of the greatest movies of all time. Everyone has talked about this movie. It's one of the most important and influential movies out there. It's influenced people like Steven Spielberg, Ajit Subbarayan, and Peter Jackson. The big star of this movie, admittedly, are the special effects. These are stop-motion special effects done by Willis O'Brien, who beforehand did The Lost World in 1925, which had fine special effects for its time period, but they definitely were primitive. This movie is the one where he really stepped up his A game, and the effects for the time look fantastic. And not just the stop motion, but how they blend the stop motion with the live action. They actually had to break new ground in how to pull off these effects. For example, sometimes you'll see the actual human characters in the background while the stop motion creatures are going around. They had to film that sequence separately and then play that sequence frame by frame while they animated the stop motion animals. It's really impressive. They also did rear projection if the stop motion effects were in the background and the main actors were in the foreground. And sometimes they just go build a giant life-size Kong animatronic, which for 1933 is an impressive looking animatronic. And the movie is just filled with so many iconic sequences that you remember because of the stop motion. There's the log sequence where Kong kills a bunch of the ship's crew on a giant log. There's the scene where Kong fights the T-Rex while saving Ann Darrow. There's the scene where he's on stage at a theater in New York City. And there's one of the most iconic finales where Kong is on top of the Empire State Building trying to pick off airplanes as he's trying to protect Ann Darrow. It's not only monumental in terms of the iconic sequences and the special effects, but also the sound design. This came out in 1933, a time when sound movies were actually quite new, and this movie takes every opportunity to use sound, whether it's the sound effects of Skull Island or from Kong and the dinosaurs to the incredible score by Max Steiner. It's one of the most triumphant and beautiful scores that he's ever done. He was one of the big composers before people like Bernard Herrmann, John Williams, Hans Zimmer. He was the powerhouse composer at the time. And what I really love is that the score is used at the most appropriate times. In two of the most iconic sequences in this movie, the T-Rex fight and the airplane scene, the score is only used to open and close the sequence. During the actual scenes, there's no music at all. It's just the sound effects, which is really a neat choice. And one other thing I really love, and I didn't really notice this until I saw King Kong again in a film class, but after the opening credits, the film score disappears. There is no film score until we reach Skull Island. It's just like in Back to the Future, where the first time we hear Alan Silvestri's score is when we first see the DeLorean. Before that, there is no musical score to be found. Obviously, the technical sides for King Kong are amazing, but that's not to put aside the story or the actors. The actors here do a really good job. Even though some of them might be a bit cliched for their time, they still work. Fay Wray plays Ann Darrow, who is the damsel in distress. She is probably the most iconic damsel in distress. And while Fay Wray does a really good job, and she does have a charming and charismatic personality, the one issue I do have with her is that once she's sacrificed to Kong, a majority of her dialogue is just screaming at Kong. But she still does a good job. She really sells you that she is terrified beyond belief at the sight of Kong and just all the other dangers that appear in Skull Island. But the problem is that she's no longer interesting. She just becomes a one-note character. Bruce Cabot plays the ship's first mate, Jack Driscoll, and the person who eventually falls in love with Ann Darrow. And he very much plays the cliched tough guy sailor, that stereotype that you would see back in movies in 1933. But he still has some charm and does a good job. But the best character in this movie for me is Carl Denham, played by Robert Armstrong. What I love about this character is how convincing he is towards other people. He is a thrill seeker. He's a director who has pretty much been out in the shit, knows how to deal with wildlife, and he sets up this voyage that in anyone's mind would seem absolutely crazy. But he does a really great job at convincing you to trust him on this voyage, that you look at him and go, yeah, this is a man I can trust. Let's go to this dangerous island that we most likely will never come back from. However, once Ann Darrow gets kidnapped by Kong, he suddenly decides, you know what, I'm going to put the movie aside. We're going to go out into the jungle and rescue Ann. I mean, part of the reason is that that's his actress, but at least he knows we're going to put the movie aside to go rescue this woman. So he takes authority, and he's not afraid to really get into the shit. The last character I want to talk about is Kong himself. King Kong is one of the most iconic movie monsters out there. And yes, he is a monster. He is portrayed by stop motion, but this movie does a fantastic job of making us feel for this creature. Kong has so many facial expressions that you can tell what he's thinking. When he first sees Ann Darrow, there's a hint of wonder in his eyes, like, what is this creature I've never seen before? When he's trying to go after Jack Driscoll after he topples the log over, you can tell that he's trying to figure out a way to get him from that cave off the side of the cliff. And when Jack stabs his hand with a knife, he looks so sad, like, that hurt. And the scene on top of the Empire State Building is the point where you feel the most sorry for King Kong, because he knows he's about to die. By climbing up the top of the building, he already signed his own death warrant. So he looks so sad. He picks up Ann Darrow one last time, and she's still freaking out. She still doesn't like him, but he looks at her with such sorrow and sadness. Right before he kind of accepts his fate, gets shot by the planes a few more times, and falls off the Empire State Building. And if you say spoiler, then come on, that's one of the most iconic sequences ever. So I'm not spoiling a thing. It's you who's been living in a cave for calling out spoilers. But my favorite expressions have to be with the giant Kong animatronic. It has this really goofy looking smile. It's so goofy that two expressions come to mind whenever I look at that. One is horny, and two is, I'm doing something bad, but I don't care. This is fun. So that's my take on the looks of the animatronic. That thing always makes me laugh, and I really enjoy that giant animatronic. So I don't have much else to say that hasn't been said already. King Kong truly is one of the greatest movies ever made, not just in the monster genre or fantasy or science fiction, adventure, whatever genre you want to place it in, but it's a movie that was made for all time. The special effects are groundbreaking, the score is beautiful, the sound design's amazing, the story is classic. There's just not much else I can say except get off your ass and go see it again, because I'm assuming most people have seen King Kong, and if not, then go see it right now. And that's my review for King Kong. Coming up soon will be my review for the sequel, Son of Kong. So look for that review sometime next week, and until then, I hope you enjoyed this review. Leave a comment down below and tell me what your thoughts are on this movie, if and when you've seen it. And as always, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you, there is only one.